So, me caveman, let's go. Number 10. Homo floresiensis. In 2003, a joint Australian and Indonesian team led by Mike Morwood and Raiden Soejono was digging on the island of Flores in Indonesia. They were not looking for a new human species. They were looking for evidence of how our own ancestors traveled toward Australia. Inside a vast limestone cave called Liang Bua, they found something that should not have existed. They found the bones of a tiny adult human, barely over a meter tall, with a skull no bigger than a grapefruit. Every floresiensis fossil ever found comes from this single cave. The most famous individual is called LB1, nicknamed Flo, or the Little Lady of Flores. She was a fully grown female, around 30 years old when she died. She stood about 1.05 meters tall. That is 3 feet and 6 inches. She was an adult, yet she would barely reach the waist of a modern person. Her brain was the strangest part. It measured only about 380 to 420 cubic centimeters, roughly the size of a chimpanzee's brain. Over time, the team recovered more than 100 fossil pieces, representing at least 9 separate individuals. The species was formally named in 2004 in the journal Nature. At first, the bones seemed to date to only 18,000 years ago. Later, in 2016, careful restudy of the cave layers pushed the skeletal remains back to between 100,000 and 60,000 years ago, with stone tools spanning from 190,000 down to 50,000 years ago. The anatomy is a puzzle. Her wrist bones are primitive, shaped like those of much older African hominins, not like ours. Her feet were extremely long compared to her legs, which would have given her an odd, high-stepping walk. The leading explanation is island dwarfism. When a large animal becomes trapped on a small island with limited food, evolution can shrink it over many generations. The ancestor may have been Homo erectus, slowly miniaturized. A competing idea says floresiensis descended from an even more primitive small hominin that left Africa before erectus. Some scientists once argued Flo was just a modern human with a disease like microcephaly. That idea collapsed because many individuals at the cave share the same tiny proportions. A disease does not strike a whole population identically. Around her lived a dwarf elephant relative called stegodon, giant rats, Komodo dragons, and storks taller than she was. Cut marks on stegodon bones suggest these little people hunted dwarf elephants. They controlled fire and shaped stone tools, all with a brain the size of an ape's. No DNA survives because tropical heat destroys it. So who they really were rests entirely on their bones, and the debate is far from settled. And if a brain that small could hunt and build, what does that say about the giant-jawed cousin who came long before her? Number 9. Paranthropus boisei. On July 17, 1959, Mary Leakey was walking a slope at Olduvai Gorge in Tanzania when she spotted teeth glinting in the rock. What she pulled out was a nearly complete skull, cataloged as OH5. Her husband, Louis Leakey, first named it Zinjanthropus boisei, honoring Charles Boise, the man who funded their work. Today we call it Paranthropus boisei, and it is one of the most alien-looking members of the human family. This species lived across East Africa from roughly 2.3 to 1.2 million years ago. Its face was huge, flat, and dish-shaped, with cheekbones that flared out like wings. Its molars were the largest of any known hominin, up to 4 times the chewing area of yours. Running along the top of the skull was a bony ridge called a sagittal crest, which anchored jaw muscles powerful enough to define the whole head. The brain, by contrast, was small, around 500 to 550 cubic centimeters. For decades, it was called Nutcracker Man, because everyone assumed those colossal teeth cracked hard nuts and seeds. Then, chemistry rewrote the story. In 2011, a team led by Thor Churling analyzed the carbon isotopes locked in the tooth enamel of 22 individuals. Tooth enamel records the chemical signature of what an animal ate. The result was a shock. The diet averaged about 77% so-called C4 plants, meaning grasses and sedges, ranging from 61% all the way to 91%. This was the most grass-dependent diet of any human relative ever studied. So Nutcracker Man was not cracking nuts at all. The microscopic wear on the teeth shows light pitting, not the deep scratches you would expect from crushing hard objects. The giant jaws were built to process enormous quantities of tough, low-quality vegetation, like a grazing animal. Boisei belongs to a group called the robust Australopithecines, built around heavy chewing. It shared the landscape with early members of our own genus, Homo habilis, and early Homo erectus. It is considered a side branch, a cousin rather than an ancestor. No stone tools are confidently linked to it. The roots of this robust lineage run deep. The famous Black Skull, catalogued KNMWT 17,000, belongs to an earlier relative and dates to around 2.5 million years ago. Boisei finally vanished about 1.2 million years ago, as the climate shifted and the more flexible genus Homo expanded. Three ideas still compete over how it lived. The old hard food theory is overturned. The current view sees it as a bulk grass and sedge grazer. A third suggests it specialized in underground storage organs, the starchy roots and tubers hidden beneath the grass. Whichever is right, this was a human cousin, built like nothing alive today. And the next species was almost the opposite problem. Not too strange to place, but too ordinary and too tangled to name. Number 8. Homo heidelbergensis. On October 21st, 1907, a workman named Daniel Hartmann was digging in a sandpit near the village of Mauer in Germany when he found a heavy human jawbone. The following year, in 1908, Otto Schoetensack described it and gave it a name, Homo heidelbergensis, Heidelberg man. That Mauer jaw is thought to be between 400,000 and 600,000 years old, and it opened a chapter of the human story that we still argue about today. This species lived from roughly 700,000 to 200,000 years ago, across both Africa and Europe. For a long time, it played a starring role as the likely common ancestor of both the Neanderthals and us. Scientists even nicknamed this period the muddle in the middle, because so many fossils from this window are hard to sort. The richest collection comes from a site in Spain at Atapuerca called Cima de los Huesos, the Pit of Bones, where the remains of around 28 to 30 individuals have been recovered. Those bones date to about 430,000 years ago. Then genetics complicated everything. In 2016, nuclear DNA from the Pit of Bones showed that those individuals were actually early Neanderthals, not a separate ancestral species. That single result threw the whole definition of heidelbergensis into question. This was a powerful, capable human. The Schöningen spears from Germany, dated to between 300,000 and 337,000 years ago, are among the oldest preserved wooden weapons on Earth. 8 or 9 throwing spears were found there alongside the butchered bones of horses. The spears had an effective close range of about 5 meters and could possibly be thrown up to 35 meters. Heidelbergensis stood tall and powerful, averaging around 1.7 meters, with a brain between 1,100 and 1,400 cubic centimeters, overlapping our own range. It had a heavy brow ridge, no real chin, and a wide, flat face. In Africa, similar fossils such as Kabwe, one from Zambia, are sometimes folded into this species, or split off as Homo rhodesiensis. The Bodo skull from Ethiopia, around 600,000 years old, even carries cut marks that hint at deliberate defleshing. In 2021, researchers proposed splitting the group again, using the new name Homo bodoensis for the African forms. This was a fire-using human, with hearths at sites like Beech's Pit in England, and possibly the first to deliberately place its dead, marked by a single beautiful hand axe nicknamed Excalibur, found in the pit of bones. And yet, because its very name keeps dissolving under new evidence, heidelbergensis is constantly written out of the popular story. It is the ancestor nobody can quite agree on. The next species had the opposite reception. It was impossible to ignore because a child found it by accident. Number 7. Australopithecus sediba. On August 15, 2008, a 9-year-old boy named Matthew Berger was running through the bush at a place called Malapa, in the cradle of humankind in South Africa. He tripped over a rock, looked down, and saw a bone sticking out of it. His father, the paleoanthropologist Lee Berger, had located that very area using Google Earth to map cave systems from his computer. What Matthew found turned out to be the collarbone of a brand new human ancestor. The young male skeleton became the holotype, nicknamed Karabo, which means the answer in the Setswana language. A second skeleton, an adult female, was found right beside him. Together, they are among the most complete early hominin skeletons ever discovered. The species was named in 2010 in the journal Science. Using uranium-lead and paleomagnetic dating, the fossils were placed at about 1.977 million years old. What made sediba so important and so controversial was its mix of features. It had a small brain, around 420 to 450 cubic centimeters, the size you would expect from an Australopithecine. But its pelvis was surprisingly modern in shape. Its hand had a long thumb and short fingers, the kind of proportions that allow a precise grip, hinting at the ability to make and use tools. Its ankle and foot combined ape-like and human-like traits, suggesting a strange way of walking and climbing. Lee Berger argued that sediba might be the ancestor of our own genus, Homo. That claim is still hotly contested. Critics point out a timing problem. Some of the earliest fossils assigned to Homo are actually older than sediba, which would make it impossible for sediba to be their ancestor. Its teeth link it more closely to an earlier South African species, Australopithecus africanus. Tiny plant fossils and hardened tartar on the teeth reveal a diet that included bark, leaves, fruit, and woody tissue, an unusual menu for a hominin. The two skeletons may have fallen into a deep death trap cave and been buried quickly, which is exactly why they are so well preserved. That completeness lets scientists study growth, body proportions, and movement in ways that are almost impossible for most Australopiths. The name sediba means wellspring or fountain, chosen to suggest a source of the human line. Some researchers see it not as a transitional ancestor, but as a late surviving offshoot of Africanus. Either way, this one accidental discovery reopened a question many thought was settled: just how bushy and tangled the early human family tree really is. And from the dry caves of South Africa, the story jumps to a tropical island, where humans appeared who should never have been able to get there. Number 6. Homo luzonensis. In April 2019, a team led by Florent Detroit announced a new human species in the journal Nature, based on fossils from Calao Cave on the island of Luzon in the Philippines. The evidence was almost heartbreakingly small. It consisted of 7 teeth, a few hand and foot bones, and part of a thigh bone, representing at least 3 individuals, 2 adults, and 1 child. The holotype, catalogued CCH6, is a set of 5 upper teeth from a single person. These fossils were dated to between 50,000 and 67,000 years ago, using uranium series methods. One of the foot bones had actually been described back in 2010, and was at first assumed to belong to a modern human. Only later, as more material emerged, did it become clear this was something else entirely. The curved finger and toe bones look strikingly like those of Australopiths from millions of years earlier, suggesting these humans were still good climbers. The teeth are remarkably small and blend primitive and modern traits. Here is the deep mystery. Luzon was never connected to mainland Asia by any land bridge, even when sea levels dropped during the ice ages. To reach it, the ancestors of luzonensis had to cross open ocean. How they did it is unknown. The leading guess is accidental rafting, swept out to sea, clinging to floating debris after a storm or a tsunami, then washed ashore. And humans reached Luzon astonishingly early. At a nearby site called Kalinga, a butchered rhinoceros and stone tools date to about 709,000 years ago, far older than the Kalau fossils. Luzonensis may be another case of island dwarfism. A population of Homo erectus shrunk down over time, just as happened on Flores. As with floresiensis, no DNA survives in the tropical climate, so its relationships rest on anatomy alone. Its mosaic of ancient and modern features breaks the simple idea that humans spread through Asia in one neat wave. Luzon became the second island in Southeast Asia, after Flores, to host its own unique human species. The combination of Australopith-like and Homo-like traits leaves scientists debating whether these are ancient features retained over a vast time, or new ones that evolved independently. Detroit himself urged caution, given how fragmentary the remains are, and some researchers want more fossils before they fully accept the species. But the implication is enormous. The region between Asia and Australia, known as Wallacea, was not a highway. It was a crucible, a scattered laboratory where isolated human populations evolved in their own strange directions. Each island could hold its own experiment. And while these island humans were quietly diverging, one species had already been spreading across the entire Old World for nearly 2 million years, only to be almost completely forgotten. Number 5. Homo erectus. In 1891 and 1892, a Dutch doctor named Eugène Dubois found the first fossils of this species on Java, in Indonesia, and called it Paranthropus erectus, the upright ape man. We now know it as Homo erectus, and it deserves a title nobody gives it. It is the longest surviving human species of all time, enduring for roughly 2 million years. Modern humans have existed for only a fraction of that. The most complete skeleton is Turkana boi, catalogued KNMWT 15,000, found in Kenya and dated to about 1.6 million years ago. He was a juvenile, perhaps 8 to 12 years old, and had he reached adulthood, he would have stood close to 1.8 meters tall, around 6 feet. His body was essentially modern in its proportions, with long legs built for efficient, long-distance walking. At the other end of the range sits Denisovans, in the country of Georgia, where fossils about 1.8 million years old are the earliest securely dated humans found outside Africa. One Denisovans skull, number 5, has a brain volume as small as 546 cubic centimeters, showing just how variable this species was. Across its whole span, erectus brains range from around 550 to over 1,100 cubic centimeters. Erectus was an innovator. It is credited with the Acheulean hand axe, the elegant teardrop-shaped stone tool that represented a huge leap in craftsmanship. Burned material at Wonderwork Cave in South Africa hints that Erectus may have used fire as far back as 1 million years ago. It was the first human to spread widely out of Africa, reaching across Asia all the way to Indonesia, and it lasted there an astonishingly long time. Recent dating at Ngandong on Java suggests Erectus survived until around 117,000 to 108,000 years ago. Older claims pushed late Javan Erectus to as recently as 50,000 years ago, which would mean it overlapped with modern humans arriving in the region. This species is almost certainly the trunk from which later humans branched, likely giving rise to heidelbergensis, and possibly to the island dwarfs floresiensis and luzonensis. Its very name, upright man, reflects how early scientists recognized its human posture. Its smaller teeth and gut compared to earlier hominins suggest a higher quality diet, possibly helped by cooking. The difference in size between males and females shrank, which often signals a change in social structure. Regional differences led some scientists to split the African form off as Homo ergaster. Yet for all its staggering success, erectus is overshadowed in the public mind by the Neanderthals, who lived a tiny fraction as long. It is the forgotten champion of human evolution, the body plan that made everything after it possible. And while erectus was fading in Asia, a far younger and stranger population was hanging on in the caves of southern China. Number 4. The Red Deer Cave People. In 2008, an international team began re-excavating 2 caves in southern China, and what they found scrambled the timeline of human evolution. The sites were Maludong, which translates to Red Deer Cave, near Mengzi in Yunnan Province, and Longlin Cave in neighboring Guangxi. The name comes from the piles of extinct red deer bones found right alongside the human remains. The team included the Chinese archaeologist Ji Xueping and the Australian paleoanthropologist Darren Curnow. The dating is what makes these people so extraordinary. The Maludong remains are about 14,500 to 13,000 years old, and the Longlin individual lived around 11,500 years ago. That is incredibly recent. These are among the youngest human fossils anywhere on Earth that show such an unusual, mixed appearance. Their skulls combine modern and archaic features: flat faces, prominent brow ridges, rounded brain cases, and large molar teeth. The findings were published in the journal PLOS1 in 2012. Curnow initially raised a startling possibility that these might be a late surviving population of archaic humans, holding on long after such forms were thought to be extinct. A 2015 study of a thigh bone from Maludong found that it resembled very ancient species like Homo habilis or early Homo erectus, deepening the mystery. The mainstream interpretation, though, is more cautious. Most researchers believe these were anatomically modern Homo sapiens that simply showed unusual or robust variation. If that sounds like a small distinction, consider what their survival means. At 11,500 years ago, while these people hunted red deer in China, farming was already beginning in other parts of the world. Southwest China is recognized as a hotspot of deep human genetic diversity, which only adds to the intrigue. Extracting ancient DNA from the remains has been extremely difficult because the warm, humid climate degrades genetic material, but progress is being made nearby. In 2022, scientists sequenced the genome of a related Yunnan fossil known as Mengzi Ren and found links to the ancestors of East Asians and even Native Americans. The label Red Deer Cave People remains informal. No formal species name has been accepted for them. The debate centers on a single question: do their archaic features represent a genuinely deep, relict lineage that survived in an isolated refuge, or are they just the normal variation and robusticity you can find within our own species? Critics argue strongly for the second view, warning against naming a new species from features that might be developmental or individual quirks. But whether they were modern humans with an old-fashioned look or true survivors from a deeper branch, they prove the same point. The human story in Asia stayed surprisingly complex right up to the edge of the modern world. And nowhere is that complexity more dramatic than in a skull that spent most of a century hidden at the bottom of a well. Number 3. Homo longi. The story of Dragon Man reads like a thriller. In 1933, a laborer working on a bridge in Harbin, in northeastern China, found a massive, beautifully preserved human skull. Rather than hand it over during a time of war and occupation, he hid it. He wrapped it up and dropped it down a well, where it sat in darkness for about 85 years. Only around 2018 did the skull finally resurface and reach scientists. In 2021, a team led by Changji described it across 3 papers in the journal The Innovation, and named a new species, Homo longi, from the word long, meaning dragon, after the Dragon River region. The skull itself is enormous. Uranium series dating shows it is at least 146,000 years old, and possibly as much as 309,000 years old. It has a brain capacity around 1,420 cubic centimeters, well within the modern human range, but its face is deeply archaic, with heavy brow ridges, large square eye sockets, and a broad, wide structure. It is a strange combination, a modern-sized brain housed behind a primitive face. The 2021 team made a bold claim. They argued that Homo longi, not the Neanderthals, might be the closest known relative of modern humans. That immediately sparked controversy. Many other researchers suspected something else entirely. Given its age, its size, and its East Asian origin, they thought the skull was almost certainly a Denisovan, a mysterious group then known mostly from DNA. For years it remained an open question. Then, in 2025, new analysis of ancient proteins and DNA from the Harbin skull confirmed it. Dragon Man was a Denisovan. Chiangji summed it up by saying that after 15 years, they could finally give the Denisovan a face. This is a remarkable moment, because it means the Harbin skull may be the first nearly complete look at what a Denisovan actually looked like. But it also creates a genuine puzzle of names. Is this species Homo longi, defined by its skull, or is it a Denisovan, a population defined mainly by its genetics? The Siahe mandible from Tibet, another probable Denisovan, shares some of the same robust features. One spectacular skull now sits at the crossroads of 2 different naming systems. Some scientists prefer to keep Homo longi as a formal species that would then include the Denisovans. Others argue the genetic label should take priority. The decades that skull spent hidden in a well became a symbol of how much chance, secrecy, and history shape what we know about our origins. It is a reminder that much of Asia's deep past is still barely sampled. 3 possibilities remain on the table: a genuine new species, a Denisovan, or a regional variant of an older form. But if Dragon Man finally gave a ghost a face, an even more unsettling species was waiting deep underground in Africa, one whose mind we still cannot explain. Number 2. Homo naledi. Deep inside the Rising Star cave system in South Africa lies a chamber so hard to reach that it nearly defies belief. To get there, you must crawl through passages that narrow to as little as 18 centimeters wide. When excavations began in 2013, Lee Berger could not fit through, so he recruited 6 slim scientists, all women, through social media, a team that became known as the Underground Astronauts. What they pulled out of that chamber, announced in 2015 in the journal eLife, was a new human species and a deepening mystery. The Dinaledi chamber has now yielded more than 1,500 fossil specimens from at least 15 individuals. Homo naledi had a brain of only about 465 to 560 cubic centimeters, roughly 1/3 the size of a modern human brain, and yet its body was startlingly advanced. It had modern-looking hands, wrists, feet, and long legs. It stood about 1.4 meters tall and weighed an estimated 40 kilograms. Its curved fingers suggest it still climbed, while its feet were well built for walking upright. It was a true mosaic, ancient and modern in the same body. Then came the date, and it stunned everyone. In 2017, the fossils were dated to between 335,000 and 236,000 years ago. That is shockingly recent. It means this small-brained species was alive in Africa at the same time our own species, Homo sapiens, was emerging. They were not distant ancestors from the dawn of time. They were neighbors. In 2023, Berger's team went further, claiming that Homo naledi deliberately buried its dead inside the cave, more than 100,000 years before the earliest known burials by modern humans. They also reported possible engravings carved into the cave walls and signs of controlled fire. These were explosive claims. A small-brained hominin performing complex, symbolic behavior would overturn a deep assumption that you need a large brain to bury your dead or make art. The scientific backlash was immediate and fierce. Critics argued the burial evidence lacked rigorous proof in the soil layers and the way the bones were arranged, and they noted the work was first released as preprints before full peer review. Reaching that pitch-black chamber without some form of light would have been nearly impossible, which is part of why the question of fire matters so much. No ancient DNA has been recovered, so naledi's place in the family tree rests on its bones. That anatomy hints at a deep, relict lineage, a branch that split early in our genus and somehow survived almost to the present. The sheer number of bodies stacked in such an inaccessible chamber is genuinely hard to explain by natural accident alone. Whether or not they buried their dead, Homo naledi forces us to question one of our most comfortable beliefs, that intelligence and complex behavior march in lockstep with brain size. It remains one of the most provocative discoveries of this century. But there is one species stranger still, one we know better than almost any other on this list, even though we have almost none of its bones. Number 1. The Denisovans. In 2010, the geneticist Svante Pääbo and his team at the Max Planck Institute did something that had never been done before. They discovered an entire human species, not from a skull, not from a skeleton, but from a single fragment of DNA. The bone was a child's finger bone, a tiny fragment excavated in 2008 from Denisova Cave in the Altai Mountains of Siberia. When they sequenced its genome, they found it belonged to a group genetically distinct from both Neanderthals and modern humans. A new branch of humanity had been revealed by molecules alone. The physical remains are almost nothing. A few finger and toe bones, several large molar teeth, and a handful of fragments. That is nearly all the Denisovan bone we have. And yet we know extraordinary things about them. They were a sister group to the Neanderthals, the two having split from each other after their shared line diverged from ours, very roughly 400,000 or more years ago. One bone from the cave, nicknamed Denny and sequenced in 2018, came from a first-generation hybrid, a girl whose mother was a Neanderthal and whose father was a Denisovan. We caught two human species in the act of mixing. Here is what makes the Denisovans the ultimate ghost lineage. They are not truly gone. Their DNA lives on in people today. Populations in Melanesia, Papua New Guinea, and Aboriginal Australia carry around 4 to 6% Denisovan ancestry. Smaller amounts appear across East and South Asia. The genetics show there were multiple distinct Denisovan populations contributing to modern humans, which means they were spread across an enormous range. The Siahi mandible, a jawbone found in Tibet back in 1980 and identified as Denisovan in 2019, proved they lived high on the Tibetan plateau, and a version of a gene called EPAS1, which helps modern Tibetans survive at extreme altitude with low oxygen, was inherited directly from Denisovans. Their reach was vast. Denisovan DNA, pulled from cave sediment, confirms long occupation of sites without needing a single bone. A molar from Cobra Cave in Laos extends their probable range into warm Southeast Asia. From frozen Siberia to the roof of Tibet to the tropics, they were everywhere, overlapping and interbreeding with both Neanderthals and our own ancestors. And in 2025, the Harbin Dragon Man skull was identified as Denisovan, perhaps finally showing us their face. They were invisible to science until genetics conjured them out of thin air. Some of the immune and metabolic gene variants they passed to us still shape human health today. Pääbo's pioneering work, including the discovery of this very species, earned the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine in 2022. The Denisovans are the definitive lost human species, a people we never met, reconstructed from a finger bone and a string of code, who nonetheless live on inside billions of us right now. Step back from these 10 species and a pattern emerges, one that explains why prehistory seems so reluctant to acknowledge them. The first culprit is fame. The Neanderthals became the public face of the ancient human world, and in doing so, they crowded out everyone else. Most people can name them, and no other extinct human. The second culprit is the evidence itself. Many of these species are known from heartbreakingly few bones, a jaw here, a handful of teeth there, a single finger bone. Naming and accepting a species from such scraps is slow, cautious, and endlessly contested work. Climate plays a quiet but brutal role. In the tropical regions of Asia, where floresiensis, luzonensis, and the red deer cave people lived, heat and humidity destroy ancient DNA. Without genetics, scientists are left squinting at anatomy and arguing. Then there is taxonomic instability. Species like heidelbergensis, sediba, and longi keep getting renamed, split, and reclassified as new evidence lands. A name that will not sit still is a name that struggles to enter the public story. Human factors matter too. Dragon Man spent 85 years at the bottom of a well because of war and chance. Spectacular fossils sit unstudied for decades. Island species were dismissed as freaks and anomalies when first announced. The recent dates for naledi and the red deer cave people defied what everyone expected, and surprising results meet resistance. Underlying all of it was a deep habit of thought, the idea of evolution as a single ladder climbing steadily toward us, rather than a sprawling branching bush full of dead ends and cousins. Each of these discoveries forced a change in that thinking, and changing a paradigm always takes years. The reluctance is not really about the evidence. It is about how hard it is to let go of a tidy story. For almost all of the last 2 million years, planet Earth was not a one human world. It was crowded with different kinds of people. Around 2 million years ago in Africa, Homo erectus walked the same landscapes as the giant-jawed Paranthropus boisei and early members of our own genus. 3 or more kinds of human, sharing the same rivers and plains. Picture it in human terms. If you could stand on that ancient savanna, you might see several distinct species of human in a single afternoon. Move forward to around 300,000 years ago, and the world still held heidelbergensis grade humans, the small-brained Homo naledi, and the very first members of our own species, all overlapping in time. Then come to roughly 50,000 years ago, perhaps the most astonishing moment of all. At that point, modern humans shared the Earth with Neanderthals in the West, Denisovans across Asia, the tiny floresiensis on Flores, and luzonensis on Luzon. At least 5 kinds of human, alive at the same time. In the scale of deep time, the world of multiple humans ended only yesterday. The region of Wallacea, the scattered islands between Asia and Australia, acted as a patchwork of separate experiments, each island shaping its own people. And these populations did not stay apart. The hybrid girl Denny proves Neanderthals and Denisovans interbred. Both of those groups interbred with us. Extinction, when it came, was a mix of competition, climate change, and simple absorption. Smaller populations swallowed into larger ones. Every one of these species built on the body template that Homo erectus established. We are not the goal that evolution aimed at. We are the single twig left alive on a branch that was once thick with cousins. How do scientists resurrect a human species from almost nothing? The toolkit is astonishing, and it explains how these ghosts come into focus. Consider the diet of Paranthropus boisei. Researchers measured the carbon isotopes locked in its tooth enamel, a chemical signature of the plants it ate, and overturned a 50-year-old nickname. The enamel remembered what the nickname got wrong. Dating is its own arsenal. Uranium series, uranium lead, electron spin resonance, and paleomagnetic methods let scientists pin an age on a fossil or the rock around it, which is how naledi was revealed to be shockingly recent, and Dragon Man at least 146,000 years old. Then there is ancient DNA, the technique that conjured the Denisovans from a finger bone and can even be pulled straight from cave sediment, with no bone at all. When DNA is too degraded, as it often is in warm climates, paleoproteomics steps in, reading ancient proteins that survive far longer. That is how the Harbin skull and the Jiahi jaw were tied to the Denisovans. The microscopic world helps too. Dental microwear, the tiny scratches and pits on teeth, reveals how food was chewed, while trapped plant fossils and hardened tartar reveal what was eaten. CT scanning lets researchers peer inside fragile skulls and build virtual reconstructions without ever touching the bone. And discovery itself has gone high-tech, with Lee Berger using Google Earth to find Malapa and mapping software guiding the team into Rising Star. Reaching the fossils sometimes demanded the human-scale ingenuity of the underground astronauts, squeezing through cracks barely wider than a book. Each technique pulls a lost cousin a little further out of the shadows, cross-checking what the bones say against what the molecules confirm. The strangest truth about these lost humans is that some of them never fully left. They are written into the living human body. The clearest example is altitude. The version of the EPAS1 gene that lets modern Tibetans thrive in the thin air of the high plateau, where oxygen is scarce, came directly from the Denisovans. A vanished species solved a survival problem for people living today. The genetic inheritance runs wide. People across Melanesia, Papua New Guinea, and Aboriginal Australia carry roughly 4 to 6% Denisovan ancestry in their genomes, with smaller traces scattered through East and South Asia. From the Neanderthal side, modern humans carry gene variants that influence immune response and skin. These were not single events. There were multiple episodes of interbreeding across Asia and Oceania, each leaving its mark. Some of these inherited variants still affect real things: how our immune systems react, how our bodies handle metabolism, how we cope with environments our ancestors faced. This is why the word lost is only half true. The hybrid girl Denny is the most direct proof of all, a person whose very existence was a meeting of two human species. Modern human diversity is partly built from the absorbed fragments of these vanished lineages. Every genome carries an archive, a record of cousins who are gone as living populations, but present as code. When we talk about extinct humans, we are not only talking about bones in a cave. We are talking about pieces of them still operating, quietly, inside us. So where does this leave the human story? Profoundly unfinished. The honest answer to how many human species once existed is that we do not know, and the regions least explored, much of Asia and island Southeast Asia, are exactly where surprises keep emerging. Each decade, a new cave or a re-examined fossil rewrites a textbook. The questions left open are enormous. We still do not know for certain whether Homo naledi truly buried its dead, or whether the red deer cave people were a relict archaic population, or simply unusual modern humans. We've only just glimpsed what Denisovans looked like, and only through one disputed skull. It is almost certain that more ghost lineages are hiding in the DNA of living people. Populations we have never found a single bone for, detectable only as faint signals in a genome. The pattern of the last 20 years suggests the tree is far bushier than anyone imagined, and that prehistory's reluctance to acknowledge these species says more about our love of a tidy narrative than about the weight of the evidence. There is a humility in all of this. For most of the human journey, to be human was to be one of several kinds, sharing the planet with other people who were not quite like you. We are the last survivors of that crowded experiment, the only twig still green on a wide and ancient branch. And the most haunting part is that the others are not entirely gone. They linger in the shape of a Tibetan's lungs, in the resistance of an immune system, in a strand of code copied faithfully across thousands of generations. We are the last of many humans, and we walk through the world surrounded by ghosts we carry in our own cells. The family tree is not finished, and neither, perhaps, is the story of what it means to be the only human left.